Ladies and gentlemen, I claim your attention and introduce Richard Evans, who's going to introduce our guest speaker tonight. Richard, over to you.
Bit dark at the back. Well, what a fantastic evening and a very, very big, let's say it, Draper's Hall welcome to you. I'm saying that because I think the clerk is amongst us, so we've got to be polite. Ladies and gentlemen, a big welcome to the annual CCLA Marylebone Executive Search lecture and reception. And this lecture is part of our Better World lectures. Now, whether you're a leader in business, charity, the armed forces, livery companies, government, and the City of London, we are all interested in ways to make a better world. You might be a trustee, a school governor, a lawyer, a chief executive, or just in your own way contributing to the public good. The notion of public service is one I think all of us here support. And at Marylebone Executive Search, these values underline our approach to business and executive search and recruitment, and working, I'm glad to say, with many of you here tonight. Now, in this magnificent hall, we have charity trustees, school governors, the legal profession, chief executives and directors of a whole range of businesses and other organizations sitting side by side. This is a great coming together, and what this event has always been about. Now, at this point, I'd like to say this is the 10th anniversary of this partnership with CCLA, and I want to give a special welcome to somebody some of you know, who was our first lecturer in 2015. She was only the second woman as Lord Mayor of the City of London. Dame Fiona, a special welcome to you. In fact, Fiona was so successful that we had to leave Carpenter's Hall because so many of you wanted to come that we come here. And as you know, it's quite difficult in the city to find a hall where about 300 of you turn up. Now, before I hand over to our chair for this evening, I just want a brief mention of our speaker. Her Honour Wendy Joseph, KC, I know is known to some of you, is a prolific writer on crime and the criminal justice system, but is a regular broadcaster and figure in the media. And each year, we have a focus on a theme of current relevance. Last year, as some of you know, our speaker explored the complexities of philanthropic giving and the challenges posed. This year, we have a theme of great public debate and indeed controversy. We shall hear more later. And as you will discover, our speaker tonight is an ideal choice for the challenges we face together on this topic. And so, I would now like to thank CCLA for their constant partnership and support of this wonderful event. And I would like you to welcome our chair for the evening, Sharika Sharma of CCLA. Please welcome Sharika.
Thank you. Thank you, Richard. It is really a great partnership, and it is a real pleasure to work with Richard and his team at Marylebone Executive Search and to bring this evening's Better World lecture delivered by Her Honour Wendy Joseph, and who I will introduce a little bit more formally in just a moment. At the heart of our talk today is, what do we really want from our criminal law, and how might we get it? At CCLA, we work with more than 30,000 charities and public sector organisations, and every single one of them has been established to do some good in the world. Good for an individual, good in their community, or good for society. They are meeting need, solving problems, and hopefully making things a little better along the way. In the UK, there are over 1,700 voluntary organisations working within the criminal justice system. And often they are supporting those that the mainstream system is unable to reach or has failed to reach, particularly those who are marginalised and easily exploited. When I was doing a little bit of background research, I was struck by a comment made by Wendy to a journalist. She says, we, that's the collective we here, we should accept that the commission of any crime is a mark that somewhere, somehow, we have failed. So here's a question. Does our legal system deliver justice for those involved? And how do we demand better? And to explore that question this evening is Her Honour Wendy Joseph, of course, with us. And Wendy has had a stellar career, too many achievements, I think, for me to share this evening. So forgive me for this abridged version. Wendy grew up in Wales. Her love of English literature led her to read English at Cambridge before changing to law in her final year. She was called to the bar by Gray's Inn in 1975, became a QC in 1998, and a full-time judge from 2007 to 2022. When she moved to the Old Bailey in 2012, she was the only female among 16 judges, and only the third woman ever to hold a permanent position there. She was also a diversity and community relations judge, working to promote understanding between the judiciary and many different sectors of our community, particularly those from less privileged backgrounds and minority groups. And she continues today to mentor young people looking for a career in law. Turning now to where she is today, turning to her writing, Wendy's first book started its life during the pandemic, when restrictions meant that she was unable to do her community work with schools. Initially intended to be a useful pamphlet, Unlawful Killings became so much more than that. Published in 2022, it was soon a Sunday Times bestseller and won a Golden Dagger for nonfiction. Her second book, Rough Justice, was published only in July last year, and I would highly recommend it. I think you will agree that we are enormously fortunate to have with us this evening Wendy to talk to us. She's going to talk to us for about 30 minutes, and then there will be opportunity for you to ask questions. And finally, you will be rewarded for all of your attention, if you so wish, with a little bit more wine, a glass or two. So, ladies and gentlemen, please, once again, can we give a really warm welcome to Her Honour Wendy Joseph.
Good evening. I've worked in the criminal law for nearly 50 years, which is actually considerably longer than most sentences that I used to pass. I've been a junior barrister, a senior junior, a silk, a Crown Court judge, an Old Bailey judge. I've sat on mental health review tribunals. I've sat in the Court of Appeal. So when I speak of where we are with the law at the moment, I ought to know what I'm talking about. But if I'm honest, I don't. And I'm not sure anyone knows where we really are. They certainly don't know where we're going. The criminal courts are in uncertain times, and it's about this I want to talk to you. Would you forgive me if I start by laying the groundwork? What the criminal courts really are. Now, you think you know, and maybe you do, but maybe you don't. So if you'll be kind enough to bear with me for just a moment, can I begin with this proposition? Criminal courts, courts like the Old Bailey, are entirely different from any other courts of law. In fact, they're not really about the law at all. Now, of course, the judge needs to know the law, or at least needs to know where to look it up. But criminal courts, unlike the civil courts, are what I call a service industry. They are there to serve us. They are about ordinary people and the mess they make of their lives and the mess they make of other people's lives. Contrast them with civil cases. In civil cases, you get parties, individuals or entities, who've got themselves into some sort of relationship with each other, whether it's contractual or tortious or familial, whatever it is, and then they wish they hadn't. In civil courts, a judge then listens to the evidence and decides what's wrong and who did the wrong, and makes an order, very often an order for the payment of money, to put it right. And that's justice. It could not be more different in a criminal court. One of the reasons is you cannot put things right in a criminal court, and anyone with an ounce of common sense can see that. The wrongs that bring people into the Old Bailey can't be put right. Every time a 16-year-old walks into the dock in my court at the Old Bailey charged with murder, it's way too late to try and put it right, because there's another child somewhere on a mortuary slab, killed by the one in the dock. And you know, no judge can undead a dead body. No judge can unviolate a raped child. The things that we are dealing with in the criminal courts, like the Old Bailey, these are things that cannot be put right. And justice there means something very different. We are not so much concerned in those courts with the individual who has offended, or the individual who has been offended against. Criminal courts are about you, about us, about all of us. And I want just to take a moment to show you how. The laws that we apply at the Old Bailey or in any criminal court are the laws that our parliaments, the parliaments we have elected, have enacted to protect us. In criminal courts, one party, the Crown, has absolutely nothing to do with the disputed events. You don't get that much in a civil court, but in a criminal court, the prosecution wasn't there when the knife went in, the prosecution wasn't there when the fraud was perpetrated. The prosecution is in the courtroom in the name of society, in your name, to represent us all. Another thing, in criminal courts, the big decision, it's not made by the judge. The big decision, guilty or not guilty, is made by you, or people like you, people who care enough about their society to put their names on the electoral register and thereby, and probably inadvertently, make themselves liable for jury service. The maximum sentence that a judge can impose is a sentence which has been created by the lawmakers we have elected, who think it is what we want. I'm not so sure they're right about that, and I'll come back to that later. But it was this reflection that the criminal courts are our courts, there for all of us. They are there to serve us. And my experience that so few people who walk into the criminal courts, whether they walk into my court as a witness or a juror or a defendant, whatever they walk in for, so few really know how they work. It was that which made me want to write about it and explain it and take away the curtain and just show what really happens. What I wanted to do was to say to people, come and sit beside me on the bench. Come and see what really happens. And it was doing that which has allowed me in due course, and it's a great privilege to be able to do it, to come and talk to people like you. You are the end user. You are the people who matter. And so our system and where we are with it now. Well, at the moment, it looks to be in extremis. It isn't working. And I choose that expression with care because it isn't the system that's wrong. It's the fact that it isn't working that is the problem. There is nothing, I venture to say, I hope you would agree with me, there is nothing wrong with our basic system. The concept of an independent judiciary overseeing trials that are fair to all parties, explaining the law to juries, to ordinary people who then decide the facts. In my book, that's fine. It's more than fine. I think it's excellent. And the world has said so for a long time. And the world is right. It isn't the theory that has broken down. It's the practice. And when I say broken down, I don't just mean things like the court roofs and the jury's lavatories backing up and the logjam of cases and the overcrowded prisons. I mean something more fundamental than that. I mean that in looking at the whole thing, the way our system works, we break it down. We break it down into little pieces. We separate the police bit from the courts bit, from the prisons bit, from the probation bit and the mental health provision and the rehabilitation. We look at all these things in little chunks of floating DNA, and they never get joined up. They never make an organic whole. You know, the criminal justice system that we have at the moment isn't a living, growing system. It's a fragmented one, and it's a sick one. And things that ail long enough eventually die. And it doesn't have to be like that. Let me take some examples. Let me take a very obvious example, one that you hear about every time you turn on the radio or open a newspaper. The backlogs of the cases. 80,000 cases waiting to be heard in the Crown Court. Too many cases unheard, says government. Defendants, witnesses, victims, all awaiting trial. Justice delayed, we all know, is justice denied. So the proposition that the backlogs won't do is a very obvious one. And government has said we must deal with it. We must unjam it. We must unjam the blockage. The proposed solution at the moment, supported, I should say, by many of the senior judiciary, is let's cut out jury trials for a great number of the cases which, for a very long time, people have had a right to a jury trial for. Let's only keep jury trials, they say, for the most serious cases. Let's remove the blockage by removing the system. Let's replace that great tranche of trials which our law has for so long allowed jury trials for, where the defendant has elected it, with something different, with a trial by judge and 2 magistrates instead. I don't know if you've heard this proposition, but it's a very, very clear proposition that is likely to be brought into effect. Well, what do we think about it, you and I? It's an idea, and no idea should be dismissed without careful thought, but, you know, neither should it be accepted without careful thought either. There would be nothing wrong with a change like that if it gave us a better system, but no one is saying it's a better system. All they're saying is it's the only way we can think of to get rid of the backlog. Well, if we have to do it, we have to do it. And I suspect that is the state of mind of many of the senior judiciary at the moment. And it would be fine, or fine-ish, if it solved the problem. But will it? Will it actually solve the problem, or will we end up with a whole lot of different problems, like how we get unpaid JPs to give up all this time to sit with the judges on the trials? Will it involve taking a judge out of the Crown Court system and parachuting them into what is the equivalent of the Magistrates' Court system? Or will we have to appoint an awful lot more baby judges who sit part-time, what we call recorders, to do the work instead? And. You get the point. You come up with a solution, but it may not really solve the problem. Now, I want to just park that thought for a moment and look at another problem that we've got. Overcrowding in prisons. Nowhere to put the prisoners. Well, that won't do either, will it? And the current proposed solution, again by government, and I really don't want to sound as if I'm knocking a government. I'm not. I'm really not. But the current proposed solution is, here's an idea, let's build more prisons. Let's have more cells. Let's have more prison staff. Well, you know, again, it's an idea, and again, we shouldn't dismiss it without careful thought. But again, you really do need to ask yourself, is this a long-term solution? What about the practical realities? The time and the cost of building the prisons, the vast expense of housing the prisoners there once you've built them, £60,000 a year for a prisoner. the difficulty of getting and training and keeping more staff, the social as well as the financial costs of it all. So I've taken as two examples, the backlogs and the overcrowding, and looked at the proposed solutions and just asked you, are these really the way forward? We'll almost certainly try these things, and they will work better or worse. But you know, my suggestion, for what it's worth, is they won't provide solutions for what is really ailing us. Because to do that, you have to identify the problem you are trying to solve. And may I suggest, the problem isn't the backlog, and the problem isn't the overcrowding. They are symptoms of the underlying problems, as are all the other things we could point to, including the state of the jurors' lavatories, the crumbling court estate, the apparently increasing number of horrendous murders, all the things that we are so occupied with. If we stopped looking at them as the problems and thought about them as symptoms of what is going on underneath, would we get any further with finding a solution? So what I'd like to suggest to you, if you would forgive me, is rather than jerking knees at this problem or that problem, maybe we could think about taking a step back and considering where we are and why we are here. This, which I'm about to describe to you, is our current system. We have a mantra for trials. It goes like this: acquit the innocent and convict the guilty. Would you like some water? I hate to see anyone suffering. We do have water here. You've got some. I know what it's like. It's just awful for her. Are you okay? Good. So the mantra for trials. We say what we want to do is acquit the innocent and convict the guilty. And then when we've got the guilty, we want to sentence them with a punishment that fits the crime. Except that neither of those things are true. Firstly, we don't ask our juries to convict the guilty and acquit the innocent. We don't. We ask them to do something which is subtly but fundamentally different. We ask them to convict those they are sure are guilty and to acquit everyone else, which of course means acquitting people that they are pretty certain are guilty, because pretty certain isn't the same thing as being sure. And then, as to finding the right sentence, the mantra here is punish and rehabilitate according to the offence and the offender. In our dreams, we do nothing like that. And it isn't even what I think we as a society want to do. How many times have I, sentencing a murderer, had the bereaved parents of the victim say to me, "Give us justice"? But you know, sometimes, quite often, very often, that isn't what they mean. What they mean is give us vengeance. They mean make him in the dock, suffer like my boys suffered. Make his family suffer like we, the bereaved, are suffering. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with any of that. It's probably what we would feel if we were in their position. And if it is what we as a society have decided we want, well and good. It's a form of righteous anger. It's the handing out of punishments to indicate our repulsion and disgust at what has happened. But where has it brought us? It's brought us to longer and longer and longer sentences. You know, when I came to the bar in 1975, a conviction for murder meant a life sentence with a minimum average term that had to be served before you could apply for parole of 14 years and 10 months. Now, the minimum average tariff that has to be served before you can apply for parole is just under 25 years. The trickle-down effect of that increase in relation to murders has been to raise the sentences for all crimes. And even that hasn't satisfied us. You give an 18-year-old a life sentence with a tariff of 54 years before he can even apply for parole, and up goes the cry in the press, we should have given him a whole life sentence so he never comes out. We send a mentally ill killer to a psychiatric hospital with no date ever for his release, and the cry goes up, well, if ever he is released because he recovers his health, then we should send him to prison. If our prisons have too many people in them and we look for other ways of trying to deal with some of them, with sentences that do not involve immediate custody, like suspended sentences or community orders, the cry goes up, but we mustn't spend money on these pre-sentence reports for some if we don't do it for absolutely everyone. Instead, it seems, we should be spending more and more on prisons, even if it is obvious to anyone looking at it, prisons are not achieving what we want. So here we are. We are caught in a vicious circle, and the question is whether it can be broken. Perhaps it can't. But we can hope, we can dream. For example, what if we took a different starting point, one that doesn't look at the narrow pinch points where things have got blocked and then tries to unblock the blockage, like the backlog of crimes, but one that actually says, ladies and gentlemen, what do we really want from our criminal justice system? So let's take another step back. Let's get some perspective. Let's ask ourselves what we do want from that system. And here's what I want. I want that all judges in all criminal courts are out of a job because there's no crime to try. It's not going to happen. Of course it's not. But if you think about it, if you stop and think about it, the reason that we have these criminal laws in the beginning isn't so that we can punish people who break them. It's to identify behavior that is so damaging to the smooth running of our society that we will not tolerate it. We don't make criminal laws in order to catch criminals, but in the hope we won't have criminals, that people won't break the laws. And that principle hasn't changed since God handed down to Moses the laws on Mount Sinai, and indeed for millennia before that. And if people do commit crime, what we want, what we should want if we've got any sense, most of all, is that they never do it again. Now, of course, one way of achieving that is just to keep locking them up for longer and longer and longer. That is the solution that has become ingrained with us. But it does have obvious downsides, not the least of which is it just doesn't work. Oh, it stops those who are locked up from hurting us, but in the end, out they come. And for so many who come out, they just offend again. And even those who don't offend again, they don't go back into society in the way we want them to. How can they? If we send men in their early 20s into prison to serve a sentence of 25 years, and they come out as middle-aged men who are utterly institutionalized, who've never organized a day of their own lives, never mind their whole lives, with no experience of living in a normal community with women and children, you know, if we think they're going to slip seamlessly back into society, we are kidding ourselves. And it hasn't made us safer. Parliament's theory, when this law was changed and we increased the average term to about 25 years, which happened in a statute in 2003, the theory was it will stop young gangsters committing crimes. I mean, like these kids who belong to gangs were going to say, you know what, 25 years is a long time. I think I'll stay home and watch Strictly. It was never going to work, and it hasn't. All that we've done is to increase and increase the sentences. There are countries where they've had a different approach and had some success. There are countries which have a quarter of our reoffending rate. But what we do now is, and what we're really good at, is we punish and we provide vengeance. But the question I want to ask you is that what we really want? Does that give us a safe, peaceful community in which we can all live? So we can see what the failures are in our system. We can see there is no overarching approach. I can tell you this, because I've seen it over and over. We have three sets of people we need to worry about: those who have committed crimes, those who are about to commit crimes, and those who might grow up to commit crimes. And we deal with them as separate problems, but they are not. They are one continuum. You know, when I was at the Old Bailey and I was doing the work with school children, I would get little kids in after court, kids of 7, who totally got that you shouldn't hurt other people. They didn't know the expression quid pro quo, but they didn't like being hurt themselves, and they got that in return you shouldn't hurt other people. Between the ages of 7 and 17, we lose great tranches of these children to a different point of view, and we need not to. We can begin, of course, with education in schools, and that's where so much of our thrust should be. But I would ask this of you, and it's a genuine question. Before we busy ourselves sending 14 and 15-year-old gang members into custody for life, might it behove us at least to ask why they join gangs in the beginning, and if we can stop them? I mean, do they do it because they are evil, because they are set on breaking up our society? Who are these heinous criminals? There are, of course, some who are just bad. But by and large, what they are children whose life experience has alienated them from our world, and they do not believe they can succeed in our world. They have no dads Their mums are working to hold down 3 jobs to keep the other children in the family together. They are very often the victims of violence, physical, emotional, or sexual. They've failed at school, not because they are stupid, but because they are alienated and they've been chucked out. They join gangs not to break our law, but because they are signing up to a different law, a different tribe, a different brotherhood. And do we bear no responsibility for that? Do we bear no responsibility for letting our after-school clubs and our social support and our mental health services and our training centres and all the other things fragment and fail? Is the best we can do, really, to send young people to prison where there are no solutions, so they come out with the same problems they went in with, homelessness, joblessness, mental illness, very often with the additional problem of addictions, which they've picked up inside? And what do? We give them £48 and a tent and wish them luck. Seems to me that is an absolute declaration of our failure. And it isn't only them who suffers, it's us. It's us most of all, our society. And if you analyse it like this, and you might choose not to, and I would absolutely respect that, but if you do analyse this, you see that what we have isn't a problem with the criminal justice system. It's a societal problem. If there are solutions, they don't lie in fiddling with this or that, but in having an overarching vision of where we want to be and how we get there. Now, I know I'm not proposing practical solutions. You could say with absolute justification, I'm only dreaming of a better world. But you know, to make it happen, you've got to dream it first. Thank you very much.
Would you like to do the question seated?
You'll have stand up.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
I think that'd be lovely.
Right. So, you have made us really think. I think there are cogs turning in this room. So we have some time for some questions, and I'm sure that well, look, the hands are up already. So what we would like to do, and Wendy, if that's okay with you, we'll take 2 at a time maybe, so we can, do you think we can, yeah? We'll try. Okay,
You want me
maybe.
to answer 2 questions at the same time?
No, I'll try and take them. Okay, we won't do that. Well,
I'll try.
Let's go to that lady. Would you say your name and your organisation, please?
Oh, thank you. I don't think I actually needed a microphone, but thank you. Thank you so much. That was wonderful. And I was sitting here, I was almost in tears. I was really having to glue myself to my seat. So my name's Faye. I work for 3 Pillars. We work with men in prison on short, long sentences. And then we work with them through into the community and support them for as long as they need us. And as you were saying, for us it's very much about building community. And for instance, if one of the guys who we work with is recalled, we write to them in prison. Our trustees will write to them in prison. And then we support them through when they come back into the community.
Yes, would you? And what was the question? I'm just desperately, I can see other hands, you see.
Yeah, so hang on, well, it's not so much a question, but I mean, you were saying what could we do, and I suppose yes, this is a question to you, and really maybe to the whole room. We recently had a barrister's firm who offered a 2-week apprenticeship for one of our guys. And so do you think that that is a viable solution, that You know, perhaps people can set up apprenticeships for guys who are coming up out of prison so that that helps them to integrate into the community and feel like they belong.
I think there are many, many things we can do, and that's one of them. But I don't think that would do what I'm really after doing, which is to actually approach the whole thing in a joined-up way. Someone needs to look at the whole picture from education at the very beginning, right through to when people are adults and needing to be reintegrated into society. And there needs to be a coherent way forward. And I think the solution that you've suggested is one potentially valuable link in it. But there are many other ways of dealing with things too.
Debbie, could we go to that lady over there? And then we have another lady in pink. Oh, there will be so many, won't we? And if you could say your name and the organisation and just the
Certainly,
question.
yeah. First of all, thank you very, very much. My name's Zoe Phillips. I've written a book called Empower Her Justice. I'm a former defendant, actually. I'd like to ask the question about what role and responsibility the press have in the criminal justice system, having been through this. I'm not a lawyer, I'm a scientist, but I've learnt a lot of law over the last 5 years. We read about the post office workers, Lucy Connolly, Alison Pearson, recently former policeman Julian Fawkes, and now recently Lucy Letby is being called into question whether it was a sound conviction. Myself included. Before we were found innocent, we were presumed guilty. And I would actually deign that the police...
Could we get to the question? I'm just so
Certainly.
aware that this...
So the question is,
Ladies and
how
gentlemen,
do we impact
really
the press?
really do appreciate that you've got things, a lot of you have got things you really care about and really want to talk to me about, and I'd be really happy to talk to you about them. But maybe afterwards, if we could deal with the questions now, and then we can maybe talk about the wider issues over a drink.
Perfect.
So your question is?
Perfect, thank you. Question is, what role and what responsibility do the press have in this country, specifically Mail Online and Daily Mail particularly?
Well, it's like everything else in life. There's the good and the bad, isn't there? And there's no doubt at all that the press have done some sterling work in uncovering things that have gone wrong where no one else has uncovered them. It's also clear that there have been instances in which the press have printed things which were plain wrong, inflammatory, and have caused real difficulties. So I think it's probably not terribly helpful to go back over history, but to look at the way we should be treating our press now. If it's of any encouragement, I've been asked to go and speak to a conference on Thursday. What's today? Tuesday. So on this Thursday, which is of ITN newsreaders and all those who work across the country with ITN. And when I said, delighted, but what on earth do you think I can talk about? They said, we want to do it right, and we want to hear from you where we are going wrong, where things go wrong. So I think there is a desire to do it right in large areas of the media. But inevitably, it is the case that sometimes newspapers are more interested in selling newspapers and garnering support than in uncovering the real details of the truth. And so I think we just need to be very cautious about it.
What we'll try and do, we've got a couple more questions. There's one right at the back there, Debbie, and I know you've been patiently putting your hand up as well as you. If we can be brief and get to the question, We will try and fit everybody in before the drinks.
Thank you. I'm Jane Deemer from the Chrysalis Foundation. Thank you very much. I'm going to sneak 2 questions. The first is really a comment. I absolutely love what you've said. Prevention rather than punitive. Totally applaud that and trying to develop that across the UK. And the question is really about the future. AI and digital doesn't really have a place at the moment in the criminal justice system other than in the hands of those who are committing crime, and they're doing it extremely well. Where do you see the digital and AI future at court, in court and around court for the future, please?
Yeah, AI is all quite new, but digital isn't. And we have embraced within the criminal courts the digital system in many more ways than you would think. And it has been very effective in increasing efficiency. You wouldn't believe it when you look at the backlogs, but they'd be worse if we didn't have it. And it has been very efficient in communications. So, for example, we sadly, to my mind, but very efficiently, we no longer have shorthand writers. Now, everything is recorded in a courtroom on a digital system, and any judge who wants to hear the evidence that was spoken just before, or 3 weeks before, or whatever it is, can do it in the privacy of their room at the press of a button. We use video links to have hearings which are not trials, but earlier hearings, preliminary hearings, for example, so that we don't need to bring defendants at great expense from prisons to the court. We don't need to bring barristers at great expense from one place to another. We use it in order to help vulnerable witnesses give their evidence by using video systems and recording systems. And so we do use digital things quite extensively now. And I would be amazed if we don't find ways of using AI as well. But like everything else, as I was saying before, there are good and bad things about it, and we need to be very, very watchful that we don't fall into traps with it.
Thank you, Wendy. Let's try and get, you've been very patient at the front here, asking, and we, and you, will come to both of you. I think if that's okay, we'll then stop, Debbie.
Okay, thank you, Wendy, for a fabulous presentation, and thank you, Richard, for inviting me. We spoke at the last presentation. My name is John Hamill. I am the Careers Director and 35 years at Robert Clack School in London's most deprived borough. And what I would like to ask is there any way in which Wendy or any of her colleagues could be thinking about potentially looking at a way of a presentation in our school regarding preventative measures and looking at the justice system, looking at ways of getting people on the right track, things like knife crime, etc., that are a big problem in East London. Early preventative measure is what I'm thinking about, and to have any of your colleagues that you know of coming into our school would be a fantastic opportunity to address that.
We rather look to the headmasters and the teachers to make sure that these things are aired in schools. I mean, one of the things that always amazes me is we bring in jurors, 12 ordinary people who just have nothing in common other than that their names were on the electoral register and they got pulled out in the same bunch. They turn into a jury. By and large, they do the job brilliantly. But how much better if we gave our youngsters experience at what is needed for that task? Why don't we sit them down in groups of 10 or 12 and ask them to discuss issues? Why don't we teach them the art of expressing what they want to say, but also listening to the arguments of other people? And most importantly, that they should grasp that there is no weakness in saying, you know what? Now I've heard you say that, I've changed my mind. It isn't a sign of weakness. It's a sign of maturity, a mature approach to thought.
One of the things that might interest you is there is a school, 2 schools in London, in fact, which took the first book I wrote and took one of the stories and acted it out. And they called in all the local schools. Each school sent in a group of 12 to be a jury. And I went down and I was the judge. And so some of the youngsters were the barristers, and they weren't constrained by what I'd written. They had completely different ideas about what good questions were. And so there are, I think, lots and lots of things, but every court should have a diversity and community relations judge, every Crown Court, and they should be there to serve you and your children. So you should get in touch with them.
Thank you. And then finally, the final question to the lady in the lovely pink top.
Thank you so much, and thank you for your presentation, and Richard also for organising. So my name is Lavinia Stennett. I'm the founder and chief exec of the Black Curriculum, the leading enterprise for the teaching of Black history and British history in schools. And I'm also an awardee of the Freedom of London. So my question is, you spoke a lot about our world, and I wonder if that is part of the problem, because historically there is a lot of amnesia about the role that Britain played in terms of justice globally. And a lot of us as people of Caribbean and also African descent are in these high percentages in the court systems. And how much of the problem is due to the fact that we're not actually learning from these communities, but rather kind of imposing what our world and a sense of belonging should be, rather than kind of this otherness that we often see, which produces a lot of the conditions that we face today.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that I have the answer to that, but I can tell you something which I think is very interesting. I was talking about kids that fall out of school. I mean, when a child falls out of school, there's nothing else for them to do, and they're wandering around the local park. We really can't be surprised when they're picked up by the local drugs dealers in the local park and get involved with them. But it's a very noticeable thing that if a child falls out of school, their choices immediately close down. I don't know if you know this. Some of you will know this. The rate of illiteracy in our prisons is over 50%. Functional illiteracy. 47% of our serving prisoners have a reading age of at level 1 or less. That's what we would hope for from a 5-year-old. You try functioning in our society if you can't read, if you can't use a computer, if you can't send messages, if you can't read the letter that says, we're about to cut off your electricity, but if you've got a real problem, get in touch with us and we will help. But you can't read the letter. You can't apply for a job. So much is shut off from you. But much worse than that, you are shut off from other people. And here's something else which I don't know if you'll think this is interesting or not, but I do. I would see again and again and again 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19-year-olds charged with murder in the dock. And they weren't evil in any sense, but they did not seem to have the capacity to feel what other people were feeling. They weren't able to empathize. Now, we think of that as a sign of some sort of pathological mental problem. I'm not sure it always is. In fact, I'm quite sure it isn't always that. I think when I stop to think about this, I think, how did I learn how other people were feeling? When we were 6 and 7 years old, we were picking up books and we were reading little stories that put us inside somebody else's head. We were experiencing what somebody in the story was going through. And we were living the story with them and seeing all the things that could happen. If you don't read, you are cut off from that. If you were locked up, heaven forfend, but if you were locked up in a prison cell, I promise you the first thing you would ask for is half a dozen books, because it would open the walls. The cell would disappear. The world would be there for you. All of those people in prison who can't read were trapped inside that ignorance. Now, it is not stupidity. It is not an inability to read. It may be problems like dyslexia, but I suspect there are much more fundamental problems. And so I think that we really need to go back to the society, the part of our society that you're talking about. It is part of our society. It's not something different. It's not something separate. It is there, and it is our failure to deal with it that we are now trying to resolve the issues of. And I think that if we just took this broader approach that embraces education, training, apprenticeships, but taking responsibility for yourself in your own world, thinking about things, talking about things, feeling that you belong to the society and that people are willing to listen to you because you have ideas that matter, will make such a difference to the whole approach. I don't want to make it sound like I'm a bleeding heart, because I'm not. I can tell you, I passed some of the toughest of sentences. But I do really think that we've got it wrong, not so much for the prisoners, though we have got that wrong, we've got it wrong for ourselves.
Thank you. Thank you, Wendy.